The night was merciless. Thunder cracked across the empty plains, rattling the windows of the old ranch house like a warning from the heavens. Wind tore through the valley, carrying the scent of rain and dust. Inside, the only light came from the dying glow of a lantern swinging in the kitchen window. The cowboy, known across the county as Silas Ward, sat in silence, nursing a black cup of coffee and the kind of thoughts that men like him never said out loud. That's when he heard it, a faint, trembling voice cutting through the storm. "You need a cook? I can learn." Silas froze. The sound didn't belong in a night like this. He set the cup down, rose from his chair, and turned toward the porch. The voice came again, small, fragile, but stubborn as a desert weed. When he opened the door, the storm nearly tore it from his hand. There she was, a girl no older than 10, her dress soaked through, hair plastered to her face, bare feet caked in mud. She clutched her hands to her chest as though she could hold the world together if she just didn't let go. For a long moment, neither spoke. Lightning flashed, casting her in white light, and Silas saw the truth in her eyes. Hunger, exhaustion, and something worse. The kind of fear that doesn't fade with dawn. He cleared his throat. "What did you just say?" "I can cook, sir, or I can learn. I'll work for just shelter." The words stumbled out desperate, rehearsed too many times on her way here. Silas's jaw tightened. He'd seen plenty of beggars pass through the frontier towns, but never a child out here, miles from any road at the edge of nowhere. Something about her tone twisted in his chest. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't even asking for food, just a place to stand without the wind tearing her apart. "Where's your family, girl?" he asked. Her eyes flickered toward the darkness behind her. "Gone," she said softly. "All gone." The storm howled louder, swallowing the last of her words. Silas studied her a moment longer, searching for deceit, but all he saw was emptiness and a strange kind of pride. She didn't flinch under his gaze, though she trembled from the cold. He sighed. "You can wait in the barn until morning. I'll decide then." The girl nodded quickly, as though she'd been expecting no better. He handed her a frayed wool blanket from the porch hook, and she murmured a faint thank you before stepping off the porch. The rain swallowed her figure within seconds. As Silas shut the door, a whisper of guilt followed him inside. He'd done his part, he told himself. No sense getting involved in whatever mess she'd crawled out of. The plains were full of ghosts, and most of them wore human faces. Still, when he sat back down, the chair felt colder than before. An hour passed. The storm refused to rest. Silas stared at the lantern flame until it blurred, wondering why those eyes, wide, hollow, yet fierce, wouldn't leave his thoughts. Outside, the barn creaked under the weight of the wind. Somewhere within that creaking, he imagined the faint sound of her voice again. "I can learn." He rubbed his temples, muttered a curse, and reached for his coat. He didn't know why, but something wouldn't let him sit still. When he stepped onto the porch again, the rain had softened into a whisper. The path to the barn was a ribbon of mud, glowing faintly under the lightning's dying light. He walked it slow, boots sinking deep with each step. The barn door groaned open. Inside, the air was heavy with hay and the quiet breathing of the horses. The girl lay curled on a pile of straw, wrapped in the blanket he'd given her, sound asleep. Her small hands were still clenched, as if holding on to her last bit of courage. For a moment, Silas just stood there, unsure of what to feel. Pity? Responsibility? Or that quiet dread of knowing the world was about to change in ways he couldn't stop? He reached to close the door when something caught his eye. Tracks. Fresh ones. Muddy prints that weren't hers or his, leading from the barn wall out into the darkness. Bigger, heavier. Boot marks. He knelt down, tracing the edges with his fingers. Whoever made them had been standing here, close enough to watch her through the cracks in the boards. Silas's stomach tightened. He scanned the open field, but the storm had swallowed everything beyond the fence line. Only silence answered. Still, the feeling of being watched didn't fade. It thickened, wrapping around him like the mist that clung to the earth after rain. He shut the barn door quietly and bolted it from the inside. The girl stirred but didn't wake. For a long time, Silas leaned against the post, eyes fixed on the gaps in the wall. The wind moaned through the rafters, and every sound felt like footsteps. When dawn finally began to rise, pale and thin, over the plains, the ranch looked peaceful again. But Silas knew better. He'd lived long enough to recognize when trouble arrived, dressed as mercy. He stepped out of the barn, turning one last time to look at the sleeping child. She looked small, harmless even, but the world around her was already shifting. The storm had brought more than rain. It had carried something to his doorstep that didn't belong to the living quiet of his ranch. As he started back toward the house, he heard it. A faint scrape behind him, soft but deliberate. His hand went to the revolver at his side. The morning wind died. He turned. Something moved in the shadows beyond the fence, slipping away before the light could find it. The cowboy opened the door slowly, his fingers hovering near the holster. Behind the girl, beyond the fence line, something or someone was waiting in the dark. When lightning split the sky in two, the cowboy saw it, just for a heartbeat, a shadow that didn't belong to the storm. It stood behind the girl, tall and wrong, like the outline of something half man, half nightmare. Then the thunder swallowed it whole, leaving only the wet prints of bare feet and the quick thump of his own heart. Silas Ward had seen plenty of bad omens in his years, a coyote staring down a horse at dawn, a hawk dropping dead mid-flight. But this was different. His hands moved on instinct, one brushing his coat aside to rest on the revolver that had made him a name in towns from Laramie to Abilene. Once, long ago, that hand had been faster than thought. Tonight, it just trembled against the cold steel. He stepped off the porch into the mud, boots sinking deep, and lifted the lantern. The light swayed, cutting through the mist that clung low to the ground. There were tracks in the muck, not hers, bigger, heavier. Boot marks again, same as the ones he'd seen near the barn. He followed them a few yards until the trail vanished into the fog. It was as if the storm itself had swallowed whoever or whatever had been standing there. When he turned back toward the barn, the door creaked open slightly. The girl was standing there, eyes wide, pale as moonlight. She said nothing, just stared at him as if waiting for permission to breathe. "You see anyone out here?" he asked, his voice sharper than he meant. She shook her head. "No, sir. Someone's been walking around my land. You know anything about that?" "No, sir," she whispered again. Her fingers twisted the edge of the blanket he'd given her. Maybe it was just the wind. Silas frowned. The wind didn't leave tracks. He wanted to push her harder, but something in her eyes, some deep haunted knowing, stopped him. Instead, he nodded toward the barn. "Get inside. Lock that door from the inside and don't come out till I say." She obeyed without another word. By morning, the storm had broken, leaving the ranch washed clean under a silver dawn. The air smelled of wet sage and burnt lightning. Silas walked the property line, finding nothing, no tracks, no trail, no hint of a trespasser. Yet the feeling of being watched clung to him like smoke. When he returned to the house, Martha, his housekeeper of 20 years, was already in the kitchen frying salt pork. "You look like you seen a ghost," she muttered, glancing at his boots thick with mud. "Maybe I did." She grunted. "Ghosts don't leave footprints, Mr. Ward, but trouble sure does." He didn't answer. When he mentioned the girl, Martha's brow furrowed. "You took her in, out of nowhere. Lord have mercy, Silas, you don't even know her name." "Didn't ask," he said. "You should have. Nothing good comes from a child who lies about where she's been." He looked up sharply. "Who said she lied?" Martha poured coffee into his cup, voice low. "Ain't what she said. It's what she didn't. You look close at that one, she's been through more than any child ought to be. Whatever she's running from, it's not done following her." Silas didn't reply. He finished his coffee and went to the barn. The girl was already awake, standing near the horse stall with a pitchfork in hand, trying to clean up the straw. Her sleeves were too long and the fork looked heavier than she was. "You ever done ranch work before?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, sir. But I can learn." That same phrase again. "I can learn." Something in the way she said it made him think she'd had to prove her worth to too many people already. He gave her a curt nod. "You'll start with feeding the horses, then we'll see." As she moved about her work, clumsy but determined, he watched her silently. Every now and then she'd pause, head tilted, as if listening for something far off. Once she turned toward the open door of the barn, staring out into the empty fields. "What are you looking at?" he asked. She blinked, startled. "Nothing, sir. Thought I heard someone call my name." Silas stepped to the doorway and scanned the horizon. The fields stretched endlessly, golden and silent. "Ain't nobody out there," he said. But when he looked down at the dirt just outside the barn, he saw it again. One muddy print, fresh, as if someone had been standing there not 5 minutes ago. That night Silas couldn't sleep. The wind had gone still, too still. The ranch felt like it was holding its breath. He lit a lamp and sat by the window, eyes fixed on the barn. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak in the wood sounded like footsteps. He told himself he was imagining it, that the storm and the girl's arrival had stirred up ghosts best left buried. But deep down, he knew better. The past had a way of finding its way home. Around midnight he heard a sound, soft at first, then sharper, a faint murmur drifting from the barn. He rose slowly, grabbing the lantern and his revolver, and stepped outside. The air was cold enough to bite. As he neared the barn, the voice grew clearer. It wasn't the tone of someone awake. It was a child talking in her sleep. He pushed the door open just enough to see her. She lay curled in the straw, murmuring between breaths. Then he heard it, the word that stopped him cold. "Clara." He froze. The name hit him like a bullet to the chest. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 2 decades. Clara, the sister he'd lost when the fire took everything he loved. No one had uttered it since. He stood there in the dark, the name echoing in his ears. The girl's voice fell quiet again, and she turned over in her sleep, unaware of the storm she'd just woken inside him. For the first time in years, Silas felt something unfamiliar crawling up his spine. Not fear of the dark, but fear of memory. He closed the barn door gently, his mind racing with questions that had no easy answers. Who was this child? Why had she come here? And how in God's name did she know that name? As the wind began to rise again, Silas whispered the name under his breath, "Clara." And from somewhere out in the black fields, a faint echo whispered it back. The first light of dawn spilled over the plains, washing the ranch in pale gold. But for Silas Ward, morning didn't bring peace. It brought ghosts. The name he'd heard echoing from the barn the night before had carved through him like a blade. Clara. He hadn't spoken it in years, hadn't dared to, because saying it aloud made the loss real again. Yet that child, barely strong enough to hold a broom, had whispered it as if the memory were her own. He saddled his horse before sunrise, the air still sharp with the scent of rain. The world was quiet except for the soft clop of hooves against the wet earth. He didn't tell Martha where he was going. He didn't have to. Some journeys don't need explaining. The path behind the ranch led through a stretch of cottonwoods, the ground uneven from years of wind and weather. At the edge of the trees, half swallowed by wild grass, stood a small, crooked fence. Beyond it, the family graveyard, 3 headstones leaning toward the east like they were listening for something. The middle stone bore a name nearly erased by time. Clara Ward, beloved sister, taken too soon. Silas dismounted and stood there, hat in hand, staring at the weathered carving. His breath came slow, heavy, like the ground itself was pressing against his chest. He remembered the fire, the screams, the smell of smoke and pine, the way she'd vanished in the chaos. They'd never found a body, just ashes and a single locket burned black. He'd buried what was left here because it was the only way to convince himself she was truly gone. But now that name had returned to him from the lips of a child who shouldn't have known it. He knelt in the dirt, brushing the moss from the stone. "Clara," he whispered, voice rough. "What am I supposed to make of this?" The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of sage from the fields. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard her laughter, distant, childlike. Then silence again. He stayed there until the sun rose high enough to burn away the morning chill. When he finally turned back toward the house, the weight of that name followed him every step of the way. Inside, the girl was already awake. She'd swept the kitchen floor, clumsy but eager, sleeves rolled past her elbows. When she saw him, she smiled, shy but bright. "Morning, sir. I tried making breakfast." The attempt was humble at best. Burned bread, half-cooked eggs, coffee thick as tar. Yet Silas found himself sitting down anyway. She watched his every move, waiting for a word, approval, correction, anything. He took a bite, grimaced, then nodded once. "Not bad." Her face lit up. "I'll do better tomorrow." "Just takes practice," he said quietly. As he spoke, he noticed something. Small gestures, half familiar. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. How she hummed softly while working. A tune he hadn't heard since his sister used to sing it while sweeping the same kitchen floor. He felt the past creeping in like the smell of smoke returning to a burned house. When Martha entered, she froze, eyes moving between the two. "Well, I'll be," she muttered. "If she don't look just like—" Silas cut her off with a glance. Enough. But the thought lingered long after Martha left the room. Every word, every look, every small kindness the girl showed scraped against old scars he thought had healed. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. The plains had seen stranger things than ghosts wearing familiar faces. By afternoon, the air had turned warm, the kind that made time slow. The girl asked if she could help in the main house. Silas agreed, more curious than cautious. She dusted shelves, polished the old mirror in the hallway, and scrubbed the wooden counters with quiet focus. He watched from the doorway, feeling an ache in his chest that wasn't quite grief and not quite comfort. When evening settled, she began cleaning the kitchen drawers, humming again. That same tune, the one Clara used to hum before supper. The sound froze him mid-step. His heart stumbled, caught between disbelief and something close to fear. He wanted to ask her about it, to demand where she'd heard that melody, but the question stuck in his throat. He'd seen men die in gunfights, stared down death more times than he could count, but this small girl humming a ghost's tune felt like the most dangerous thing he'd ever faced. She glanced over her shoulder. "Did I do something wrong, sir?" "No," he said softer than he meant. "Just keep working." She smiled again and went back to cleaning. But as she pulled out the bottom drawer of an old wooden chest, something small slid loose and clattered to the floor. It was a tarnished silver locket, the hinge rusted, the chain broken clean through. She picked it up carefully, wiping away the dust, curiosity glinting in her eyes. When she clicked it open, her breath caught. Inside, beneath a thin sheet of cracked glass, was a faded photograph. 2 children standing in front of the very same ranch house. One was a boy with the same sharp jaw and cold eyes she saw in Silas. The other was a girl with soft curls and a dimpled smile. The girl in the photo could have been her reflection. She stared at it, heart pounding. For a moment she thought it must be some trick of the light. But no, the resemblance was too exact. Same chin, same eyes, even the faint scar above her eyebrow. "Sir," she called, voice trembling, "who are these people?" Silas turned from the doorway, already knowing what she'd found. His eyes met hers, and something in them went hollow. "Where'd you get that?" "It was in the drawer," she said, holding it out with shaking hands. "Who is she?" He didn't answer. The air between them thickened, heavy with history neither could name. The girl glanced, cooled down again, and the faintest whisper escaped her lips. "She looks like me." Silas's face turned pale as ash. "Put that down." She obeyed, setting the locket on the counter. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. For the first time she saw fear in him, not of danger but of truth. He took the locket and closed it gently, his thumb brushing the worn engraving on the back. Clara Ward, 1867. Outside, the sky dimmed into violet dusk. The ranch was quiet, but the silence felt wrong, like the calm before something breaks. Silas set the locket on the mantel and looked out the window toward the family graves. His voice was barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here, girl. Some things are meant to stay buried." The girl's gaze drifted back to the locket, and for just an instant in the reflection of the glass she thought she saw the woman from the photograph standing behind her, smiling. The flicker of lamplight trembled against the locket's cracked glass, and the girl froze where she stood. Her reflection stared back at her, not merely similar to the girl in the photograph, but identical. Every line, every curve, even the faint scar above her brow matched perfectly. The breath caught in her throat. Somewhere deep inside, a memory shuddered awake. Smoke, a woman's cry, the sound of horses screaming in panic. And then nothing but darkness. She snapped the locket shut so hard it nearly cut her fingers. Panic flooded her chest. She stuffed it into the pocket of her dress, heart hammering against her ribs like it wanted to break free. She turned to make sure the cowboy wasn't watching. He wasn't. He had stepped outside to fetch wood. The girl's hands trembled as if the silver itself burned to touch. When Silas came back in, the storm door slammed behind him. He dropped an armful of kindling beside the hearth and studied her face. "You look pale," he muttered. "You sick?" She forced a weak smile. "Just tired, sir." He didn't press further, though his eyes lingered longer than they should have. Something about her had changed. He could feel it. The girl who had walked onto his porch was desperate and hungry. The one standing before him now seemed haunted by something older, heavier, like she carried a grief too ancient for her years. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The wind outside had calmed, but inside the girl's mind, the storm still raged. Every time she closed her eyes, flashes of another life bled through, running through tall grass as flames devoured the horizon. The smell of smoke and charred wood. A woman's hand reaching for her through the fire. She woke gasping, clutching her chest, whispering the name she couldn't forget. Clara. From his room down the hall, Silas heard her. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of her muffled sobs clawing at his conscience. There was a fear in her voice he recognized too well, the kind that comes from losing everything. He rolled onto his side, trying to shake the unease, but his mind wouldn't let go of that locket, of her face mirrored against the dead. Morning came gray and heavy. A knock at the door startled them both. It was Dr. Alcott, the town physician, a friend who came by once a month to check on the livestock and the ranch hands. He stepped inside, brushing dust from his coat. "Heard you got company," he said, nodding toward the girl. "Found her in the storm," Silas said quietly. "She's been working for her keep." The doctor studied her closely, eyes narrowing behind round spectacles. "You look familiar, young lady," he said. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Lila, sir." "Lila?" he repeated, testing the sound of it. Then he turned to Silas. "You ever notice she's got the same eyes as your sister did?" The air thickened. Silas's jaw flexed. "You mind your manners, Alcott." The doctor lifted his hands in surrender. "No offense meant, just an observation. But if I didn't know better, I'd swear I was looking at Clara herself, just smaller." He gave a nervous chuckle, but no one joined him. After the doctor left, silence stretched through the house like a rope pulled too tight. The girl busied herself scrubbing dishes, pretending not to notice the way Silas watched her. He said nothing, but suspicion had rooted itself deep in his eyes. That afternoon she went to the barn to breathe. The air was cooler there, heavy with hay and horse sweat. She sat in the corner, pulling the locket from her pocket again. Her hands shook as she opened it, eyes tracing the faces inside. It wasn't just resemblance, it was truth. She felt it in her bones as though the woman in the picture had once held her hand. "What are you?" she whispered to the air. "Why do I see what I can't remember?" A voice broke the silence from behind the stall. "If you're talking to ghosts, you're on the right land for it." It was Martha. The old woman leaned against the stall door, arms crossed, eyes sharp as glass. "I seen you with that locket," she said quietly. "You think I don't know what it means?" The girl's stomach knotted. "I wasn't stealing, ma'am. I just didn't say you were, but you best understand something. Around here, folks don't like strange coincidences. You look too much like the dead and they'll start calling you cursed." The girl's lips trembled. "I didn't ask to look like her." "No," Martha said, voice softening. "But fate don't ask for permission, does it?" She turned toward the barn door, pausing before she left. "Whatever brought you here, child, it ain't finished with you yet." The girl sat there for a long while after, staring at the locket. Her pulse drummed in her ears, matching the rhythm of a memory that wasn't hers. That evening she overheard them, Silas and Martha, speaking in the kitchen. "She's hiding something," Martha said. "I can feel it. You think she's lying? I think she's scared, but fear don't explain that face." Silas exhaled. "You're saying what I've already been thinking. Clara's gone, buried. But every time that girl looks at me—" He trailed off. "Hell, Martha, sometimes I think the world's playing tricks on me." The girl pressed her back to the wall, every word slicing deeper. "They think I'm a fraud, a liar." She wanted to run, to disappear into the open plains and never come back. But some force pinned her where she stood. A strange pull, like the land itself, wouldn't let her leave. As the night thickened, a wind rose from the east, carrying the scent of smoke again. Silas stood by the window, the weight of the past pressing down harder than ever. He thought of the grave behind the ranch, the doctor's words, and that photograph. Too many coincidences, too much that didn't make sense. Before dawn, he made up his mind. He couldn't live with half-truths, not in his own house. The first light crept over the horizon as he walked toward the barn, boots crunching over frost. The girl was awake already, sitting near the stall, her face pale, the locket still clutched in her hand. Silas stopped in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the gray dawn. The silence between them felt alive. He took one step closer, eyes locked on hers. "Enough secrets," he said, voice low and hard. "Who are you really?" The girl's breath hitched. For the first time, she couldn't tell if he was asking out of fear or hope. The locket slipped from her hand and hit the ground, springing open on its own. The photograph inside had changed. The faces were gone, replaced by a mirror image of the two of them standing exactly as they were now. The air in the barn was thick with dust and silence. Dawn painted everything in cold gray light as the cowboy stood before her, his shadow stretching long across the straw. His voice had carried the weight of a man used to getting truth the hard way. And now, every heartbeat between them was a question hanging sharp in the air. The girl clutched the locket in both hands, her knuckles white, eyes darting toward the door as if running could still save her. Then, all at once, the words tumbled out of her mouth like a secret too heavy to carry any longer. "I don't know who I am," she gasped, tears catching in her throat. "But someone wants me dead." Silas Ward froze, the world around him shrinking to that one trembling voice. His instinct was to doubt, to harden himself against pity. But this was different. There was no lie in those eyes, only terror and confusion, the kind that came from being hunted. He took a slow step closer, his boots crunching in the straw. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Tell me what you remember." The girl shook her head, words stumbling out in fragments. "I was running. From fire, I think. There were horses, men shouting. I remember a woman's hand pulling me through smoke, then falling. Then I woke up in the woods. I've been walking ever since." She hesitated, her gaze flicking to the locket. "That's all. Until I found this place." Silas's jaw tightened. "You remember nothing else? No name? No town?" She shook her head again, tears streaking down her face. "Just the sound of her voice. The woman, she called me—" She stopped, searching for something in the fog of her mind. "She called me Lila. But I don't know if that's real or if I made it up." Silas leaned back against a wooden post, rubbing his temple. The story made little sense, yet every piece of it stirred something familiar in him. Fire, smoke, a woman's scream echoing across years. He thought of his sister's death again, the unanswered questions, the child she'd never had, or so he'd believed. The girl wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You don't believe me," she said softly. "I believe you've been through hell," he replied. The rest we'll see in time." His voice softened, almost reluctantly. "You can stay here, but you'll earn it. Work for your keep like anyone else." Her eyes widened with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, sir. I promise I won't be a burden." He turned to leave but paused at the doorway. "You've already been more trouble than you know," he muttered, though his tone lacked the sting it once had. Over the next few days, the rhythm of life on the ranch began to change. For the first time in years, laughter, small, hesitant laughter, found its way into the silence of those weathered walls. The girl threw herself into chores with clumsy determination. She burned breakfast twice, startled the horses trying to feed them, and nearly set the wash house on fire. But every mistake came with a spark of progress. Silas watched from a distance, pretending not to care, but the truth was she reminded him of something he'd long forgotten: purpose. The ranch had been a hollow place since Clara's death, a quiet monument to grief. But now each morning felt less like endurance and more like life. Sometimes he'd find her humming again while she worked, always that same half-remembered melody. It haunted him still, but now the sound didn't hurt as much. One evening he even found himself humming it too without realizing it, until she turned and smiled in quiet surprise. "You know that song?" she asked. "Used to," he said, his voice distant. "My sister sang it." The girl's expression softened, and she said nothing more. As the days passed, her nightmares lessened, though not completely. Every so often she'd wake screaming, trembling as if someone were standing over her in the dark. Silas would come to her door, waiting silently until her breathing steadied. He never asked what she saw. Some memories were best left buried until they decided to rise on their own. Then came the first real peace the ranch had known in years. The fields turned gold again under a forgiving sun. The fences were mended, the cattle grazed quiet and full. Even Martha, who had eyed the girl with suspicion, began to soften. "She's got spirit," she told Silas one afternoon. "Might be what this place needed." He grunted. Spirit's one thing, trouble's another. But he didn't deny it. That night they ate together for the first time, a simple supper of beans and bread. The girl, proud of her half-burnt meal, waited for his reaction. He took a bite, chewed, and said, "Could use salt." She laughed, a light sound that startled them both. It wasn't a family, not yet, but it was something like it. The wind outside shifted, the air grew still, heavy. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, sharp and lonely. Silas glanced toward the window. "Storm coming," he murmured, but it wasn't thunder that followed. A crack split the air, a gunshot, sharp and cruel. The window shattered beside them, spraying glass across the table. The girl screamed, diving to the floor. Silas was already moving, pulling her behind the stove. Another shot followed, tearing through the wall where her head had been seconds ago. "Stay down!" he barked, reaching for the rifle propped near the door. Martha stumbled into the kitchen, pale and wide-eyed. "Lord have mercy, what's happening?" "Someone's out there," Silas shouted. "Get the girl to cover." He crouched low, peering through the broken pane. The yard was dark, the moon buried behind clouds. Only the faint outline of the corral fence glowed silver in the distance. "Why would anyone shoot at us?" the girl whispered, shaking. He didn't answer. His mind raced back to her confession. "Someone wants me dead." He thought it a frightened child's fantasy. Now the holes in the glass said otherwise. "Get in the cellar," he ordered. Go!" The girl hesitated. "They're after me, aren't they?" He turned toward her, his voice low, hard. "Don't ask questions, just move." She ran for the trapdoor near the pantry, Martha following close behind. Another bullet struck the door frame, splintering wood inches from her shoulder. Silas fired into the darkness, a warning more than a strike. The gunshot echoed across the open fields, but whoever had come didn't return fire. Silence followed, heavy, watchful silence. He waited several minutes before lowering his rifle. The night had gone still again, the wind dead, the air thick with gunpowder and fear. He walked to the shattered window, staring into the blackness beyond the fence line. There were no figures, no footprints he could see. But he knew better than to think the danger was gone. Someone had found her. Silas turned from the window just as the cellar door creaked open and the girl climbed out, trembling. Her voice broke as she whispered, "He's here, sir. The man from my dreams. He's out there." Smoke curled upward in a thin, steady line from the ridge above the ranch, too deliberate to be from the morning firewood. It hung in the air like a warning. Someone was watching. Silas Ward lowered his field glass, jaw tightening as the realization hit. Whoever had taken that shot the night before hadn't fled far. The bastard was still up there, patient as a coyote, waiting for another chance. The plains lay silent below, the first light of dawn stretching over the fields. Inside the house, the girl and Martha were still asleep. Silas pulled on his coat, strapped his revolver to his hip, and slung his rifle across his shoulder. He'd lived long enough to know what this meant. The only way to keep his ghosts buried was to chase the living ones into the hills. He left before sunrise, moving quiet through the wet grass. The air still smelled faintly of gunpowder. Every few steps he stopped and scanned the ridges. The trail wasn't hard to follow. Fresh boot prints led north toward the canyon. The man had moved fast, but not careful. There was confidence in those tracks, maybe even arrogance. The kind that came from a killer who believed he'd already won. The path narrowed as he entered the canyon pass, red rock walls rising high on both sides. The echoes of his boots came back doubled like ghosts walking beside him. Silas knew this terrain. He'd ridden it before, back when he was younger, meaner, before the weight of loss slowed him. Somewhere between the cliffs, he found a patch of blackened brush, a spot where a rifle had been fired and cleaned. He knelt, fingers brushing the soil, still warm. He followed the ridge trail another half-mile until the smell of smoke thickened again. That's when he saw it, a camp tucked behind the rocks, hidden from the valley view. A single horse was tethered near the ashes of a campfire. The rider was gone, but his mark wasn't. Silas crouched low, eyes scanning the site. There was a rolled blanket, a half-eaten ration of beans, and beside it something folded, a letter sealed with wax. He hesitated only a second before breaking it open. The handwriting was rough but clear enough to read, "You find the girl and you finish it. She's worth more dead than living. Leave the man alive. He don't know the truth yet." Silas's pulse kicked hard against his ribs. He read the words twice, his hands tightening around the paper. The target wasn't him. It was the girl. The shot through the kitchen window hadn't been a warning. It was meant to kill her. He stood, heart pounding, scanning the canyon edges. "Who the hell are you?" he muttered under his breath. That's when he saw the symbol carved into a nearby rock. A snake coiled around a spurred boot. He froze. He knew that mark. Years ago, when his ranch had burned and his sister vanished, that same insignia had been left behind on the scorched gate. It was the brand of a gang known as the Hollow Spurs. Outlaws who terrorized half the territory before disappearing into the mountains. The leader of that gang had been a man Silas once called family. He swallowed hard, a sickness curling in his gut. Could it be? Could his own blood still be alive after all these years, sending men to finish what the fire hadn't? He pocketed the letter and searched the camp again. There wasn't much. A tin of bullets, a torn saddlebag, and beside the fire pit, a small metal box buried in ash. He dug it out and flipped it open. Inside was a silver ring, tarnished but unmistakable. The serpent and spur engraved around its band shimmered faintly in the morning light. His breath caught. He turned it over in his palm, staring at the initials carved inside. J.W. "Jacob," he whispered. For a long moment he stood there frozen, the ring heavy in his hand. Memories came flooding back, two brothers riding side by side across the plains, young and fearless. Then came betrayal, the fire, the screams. Jacob Ward had died in that blaze, or so Silas had believed, but this ring said otherwise. If Jacob was alive, then every wound Silas carried had been cut by his own blood. The sound of gravel shifting broke his trance. He turned sharply, rifle raised, eyes scanning the cliffs. A figure moved just beyond the ridge. Quick, deliberate, the glint of a rifle barrel catching the sun. Silas dove behind a boulder as a bullet ricocheted off the stone above him, spraying dust into his face. He rolled to one side, firing a single round toward the ridge. The shot echoed through the canyon and the figure ducked, retreating out of sight. When the silence returned, all that was left was the faint sound of a horse galloping away. Silas cursed under his breath. The shooter had been waiting to see who'd come snooping. Now the game had changed. Whoever they were, they knew he was alive and hunting. He climbed back toward his horse, scanning the ground for any clue left behind. That's when he noticed another set of tracks, smaller ones this time, half the size of the outlaw's boots. Fresh, light prints heading away from the camp and toward the east. His chest tightened. The girl. She must have followed him. He'd told her to stay at the ranch, but curiosity or fear must have driven her to find him. "Fool child," he muttered, swinging onto his horse. He kicked the reins hard, the animal surging forward down the trail. The canyon walls rushed by in streaks of red and gold as he followed her tracks through the sand. The wind stung his face, but all he could see was that little girl lost in a land full of ghosts and guns. He followed the trail until it vanished into the dry riverbed at the canyon's mouth. The only sound now was the whisper of wind through the rocks. He dismounted, looking out over the vast emptiness. Somewhere out there, his past was waiting for him, armed, ruthless, and wearing his brother's face. As the sun began to sink behind the ridge, Silas turned the ring over once more in his hand, gleamed faintly in the dying light as though mocking him. The world had come full circle, his sister's child, his brother's betrayal, and a lifetime of guilt, all converging on this cursed patch of earth. He slipped the ring into his pocket, the metal cold against his skin. The next time he saw Jacob Ward, there'd be no mercy left between them. A shot rang out from somewhere deep in the canyon, followed by the distant cry of a young girl's voice echoing off the stone. "Silas!" The silver ring gleamed faintly in Silas Ward's palm, its serpent and spur engraving catching the dying sun. He turned it over slowly, fingers trembling, his voice barely above a whisper. "So you're alive after all." The name Jacob tasted like rust and regret. The sound of it brought back 20 years of pain he'd buried under dirt, whiskey, and silence. The hills around him held still as if listening. A vulture circled high overhead, drifting on the warm updrafts that rose from the canyon floor. The air smelled of dust and old memories. Silas stood there, staring at the ring until the world around him blurred into the past. He remembered the day it all began, the feud that split blood from blood. He and Jacob had built this ranch together back when hope still meant something. They'd been young and bold, twin wolves carving a living from the frontier. But greed, like drought, has a way of cracking even the strongest foundations. A land deal gone bad, a missing sum of money, a bullet fired in anger. It was never clear who pulled the trigger first, only that the fire came after, and when the smoke cleared, their sister Clara was gone. Jacob had vanished into the hills, taking his vengeance with him. For years there were whispers, a raid here, a robbery there, outlaws calling themselves the Hollow Spurs. Silas had hunted them once, but after finding only graves and ashes, he gave up the chase. Until now. He slipped the ring into his coat pocket, the metal pressing against his chest like a brand. The past wasn't finished with him. When Silas returned to the ranch that evening, the sky had turned the color of blood and gold. The girl was sitting on the porch steps, hugging her knees, her face drawn but calm. When she saw him approach, her eyes softened with relief. "You were gone a long time," she said quietly. Had to see where that shot came from. Did you find him? He hesitated. Not yet, but I found something worse. Her gaze dropped, and she seemed to sense the weight behind his words. Was it because of me? Silas didn't answer right away. He looked out toward the hills, the horizon burning with the last of daylight. Maybe, he said finally. But this ain't your fault. You just walked into a storm that started long before you were born. She nodded, small and solemn. Then, as if trying to change the air between them, she asked, "What was he like? Your brother?" He gave a bitter smile. Smart, mean when he had to be. He could charm the devil if it'd get him out of trouble, but Jacob always wanted more. More land, more money, more power. And when I wouldn't help him steal it, he took it anyway. Her voice was barely a whisper. And your sister? Clara? Silas's expression darkened. She tried to stop him. He didn't mean for her to die, but sometimes the road to hell's paved with accidents. The girl's eyes shimmered in the lantern light. She didn't speak, but he could tell she understood the shape of guilt. That same ache had lived in her since the day she arrived. As the night deepened, the ranch settled into uneasy quiet. Silas sat by the hearth, the fire snapping low, the ring glinting in his hand. Across the room, the girl dozed in a chair, her head tilted against the backrest, her hair catching the firelight. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel completely empty. He leaned back, letting exhaustion pull at him, but his thoughts wouldn't rest. Jacob's shadow stretched long across every corner of his life. What if the girl's arrival wasn't chance? What if she was the key to whatever plan Jacob had been spinning all these years? He'd always been cunning enough to use innocence as bait. But then she stirred in her sleep, mumbling something half-dreamed. He moved closer, his hand brushing her shoulder lightly to wake her. She blinked up at him, confused. "You were dreaming," he said softly. Her eyes were glassy, far away. "A fire, I saw it again, and a man standing in the smoke. He called me Little Dove." Silas's stomach turned. That was what Jacob used to call Clara when they were young. He forced his voice steady. "You ever seen that man before?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but I think he's the one following me." He didn't say what he was thinking, that the man might not be a stranger at all, but her blood. Instead, he rose and stirred the fire, feeding it another log. "You don't need to worry. Nobody's gonna hurt you while I'm still breathing." "Thank you, sir," she murmured, her voice small and sincere. The word "sir" lingered, respectful but warm, and for the first time it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like trust. The next morning she joined him in the yard, learning how to saddle a horse. She was terrible at it, fumbling with the straps, but she laughed through her mistakes. Silas found himself smiling too, despite everything. Each small success pulled him a little further from the anger that had ruled him for half his life. In her innocence, he found something he thought he'd lost: mercy. That evening, as the sun dipped low, a rider appeared on the distant ridge. Silas's hand went to his rifle before the figure even reached the gate. The horse was black as pitch, the rider cloaked and dust-covered. When the stranger finally stopped, he didn't dismount. He simply tossed something into the dirt and turned his horse around, galloping off without a word. Silas approached carefully. It was a tin box, small and rusted, bound with a strip of leather. Inside lay a single folded note and a bullet engraved with a familiar symbol: the serpent and spur. He unfolded the note. The handwriting was unmistakable, bold, slanted, impatient. "If you want the truth, come to the canyon. Alone." The wind picked up just then, carrying the smell of smoke from the hills. He closed the note, tucking it into his coat. The girl came running from the porch, her face pale. Who was that man? Silas looked toward the horizon where the rider had disappeared. "No one good," he said quietly, "and no one who scares easy." He turned back toward the house, every line in his face set with the grim resolve of a man walking toward the inevitable. "Stay close to Martha," he told her. "And if I'm not back by morning, you keep riding until you can't see this ranch anymore." Her eyes widened. "You're going after him, aren't you?" He paused at the door, fingers tightening on the frame. "He's my brother," he said simply, "and it's time I buried what's left of him." As Silas saddled his horse under the moonlight, a shot echoed from the canyon, one that didn't come from him. The canyon stretched before him like a scar carved through the earth, red stone walls rising high, jagged and ancient, holding the heat of 1,000 forgotten days. The wind whispered through the cracks, carrying the scent of sage and gunpowder, and somewhere deep within those cliffs waited the ghost Silas Ward had come to confront. He rode slow, his horse's hooves crunching on gravel, eyes narrowed against the harsh sun. Beneath the brim of his hat, his jaw was set hard. He'd buried his brother once, or thought he had, but the land had a cruel way of unearthing the dead. As he reached the canyon's heart, the silence thickened. Too still, too quiet. The shadows seemed to breathe. Then came the sound, the scrape of a boot against stone. Silas turned sharply, rifle raised. "Easy now, brother," a voice drawled from the rocks. From behind a jagged ledge, a man stepped forward, his silhouette framed against the burning sky. The years had carved deep lines into his face, but there was no mistaking those eyes. Cold, cunning, and achingly familiar. Jacob Ward, alive. Silas's grip tightened on the rifle. "I saw you die." Jacob gave a slow, crooked grin. "You saw what I wanted you to see. Fire's a fine way to fake a grave when the whole world wants your hide." The two men stood across from each other, the air between them heavy with the ghosts of everything they'd been. Brothers once, enemies now. "Why?" Silas asked, his voice steady but raw. "Why crawl back out of hell after all this time?" Jacob took a few steps closer, boots grinding the gravel. "You already know why. You got something that belongs to me." Silas frowned. "The ranch? The land? That's what this is about?" Jacob shook his head slowly. "Not land. Flesh and blood." The words struck harder than any bullet. Silas's eyes narrowed. "You talking about the girl?" A cruel smile touched Jacob's lips. "She ain't yours, brother. She's mine to claim. Or she was before Clara hid her from me." The air seemed to vanish. "Clara?" Silas whispered, his heart pounding. "What are you saying?" Jacob's gaze burned with bitter triumph. "You always thought she died without a word, didn't you? But she had a secret, a child born out of shame, hidden from the world. When I left, she begged me to help her run. Said she couldn't raise the girl with your righteous shadow hanging over her. You think you buried Clara's ghost, Silas? You've been feeding her daughter all this time." For a long frozen moment, neither man moved. The canyon itself seemed to hold its breath. Silas felt the ground tilt beneath him. The child's face, the eyes, the smile, the way she hummed that same tune, every piece of the puzzle snapped into place with a cruel kind of clarity. His sister's daughter. His blood. "You're lying," he muttered, but his voice cracked. Jacob laughed, the sound dry and bitter as sand. "Believe what you want, but you know I ain't. You saw her face. She's the spittin' image of Clara. And she's got something else, too." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn journal. "Your sister kept notes. Names, locations, the deed to land worth more than this whole valley. She was gonna give it to the girl one day, but now—" He trailed off, his grin sharpening. "Now it's mine." Silas's stomach twisted. "You'd steal from your own blood?" Jacob's voice hardened. "Blood's just ink when there's money to be made." The two men circled each other, the years of silence between them breaking apart like glass. "You let her die," Silas said, his tone low and dangerous. "You left her to burn." Jacob's eyes flickered, the faintest hint of guilt showing before pride crushed it. "She made her choice. I made mine. Don't pretend you were innocent, brother. You turned her away first." Silas's chest ached with the memory. The night Clara came to him, terrified, begging for help. He'd refused, thinking her loyalty to Jacob would only bring ruin. Now he saw the cost of that choice written in the girl's face. He lowered his rifle slightly. "That child don't belong to you," he said quietly. "She don't belong to me neither." but I'll die before I let you lay a hand on her." Jacob's smile faded. "Then I reckon that can be arranged." He moved faster than memory, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. Silas dove behind a boulder as the shot rang out, the bullet sparking off stone. Dust filled the air. He fired back, the echo bouncing through the canyon walls like thunder. "Still shoot like you mean it," Jacob called out, reloading. "But your hand's slower now, old man." "Still steady enough to end you," Silas replied, his breath ragged. They traded shots across the canyon floor, each blast ringing with the weight of 2 decades of betrayal. When the smoke began to clear, Jacob's voice came again, closer this time, almost gentle. "You could have had it all, Silas, the ranch, the land, even the girl. But you were always too proud to take what's yours." "I take what's earned," Silas said through clenched teeth. Jacob stepped into view, gun still raised. "Then earn this." The next shot cracked through the silence, sharp and final. Silas staggered back, clutching his side. Blood bloomed against his shirt, dark and spreading fast. The rifle slipped from his hands, clattering to the dirt. Jacob approached slowly, lowering his weapon. For the first time, his smirk faltered. "Didn't have to be this way," he muttered. Silas fell to his knees, the world spinning around him. He looked up, eyes fierce despite the pain. "You're wrong. It always had to end like this." Jacob hesitated, something flickering behind his cold stare. Pity, maybe, or the faint echo of brotherhood. But it vanished as quick as it came. He holstered his gun, turned toward the canyon's edge, and vanished into the shadows. Silas fell forward, pressing a trembling hand to his wound. The dust around him turned dark with blood. The canyon seemed to hum with the sound of his heartbeat fading fast. Then, faintly, he heard it. The distant echo of hooves, the desperate cry of a young girl's voice. "Silas!" He tried to lift his head, but the world tilted again. His vision blurred, the cliffs melting into one endless red haze. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was the figure of a girl running toward him. And behind her, a second shadow closing in, revolver drawn. When the cowboy fell, something inside the girl snapped. It wasn't the cry of a child or the fear of loss that tore through her. It was something deeper, older, buried in her blood like a storm waiting to break. The sound of the gunshot still echoed through the canyon walls as she ran, her boots slipping in the dust, the wind tearing through her hair. She didn't feel the sharp rocks cutting her hands or the dry air burning her lungs. She only saw him lying there, blood spreading across his shirt, the red earth beneath him turning darker by the second. "Silas!" she screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes fluttered open, pale and glassy, but still alive. Relief flooded her chest like air after drowning. She pressed her small hands against the wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. "You're going to be all right, you hear me?" His lips moved, barely sound. "You shouldn't be here." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. "Not again." Silas tried to push himself up, but the effort sent a wave of pain through his body. His hand trembled, reaching for the rifle beside him, but she stopped him. "Don't," she said softly, her voice shaking. "You've done enough." He managed a faint, weary smile. "You've got your mother's fire." At that, her heart clenched. A dozen flashes of memory flickered through her mind like shards of broken glass. The smell of smoke, the heat of flames, a woman's arms around her, pulling her through the fire. And then the scream, the same scream that had haunted her dreams since the night she stumbled onto this ranch. It wasn't a stranger's voice. It was her mother's. Clara. The truth hit her like a bullet. The woman she'd seen in the locket wasn't just a face from a photograph. She was the last memory she had before the darkness swallowed everything. Silas's breathing grew shallow. "Listen to me," he rasped. "You need to go. He'll come back to finish it." Her jaw tightened. "Then I'll be the one waiting." "Lila." But she was already reaching for his revolver, the heavy Colt catching the light of the setting sun. Her small hands trembled as she checked the chamber. 6 bullets. Enough to end this. Silas's eyes widened with alarm. You don't know what you're doing. Yes, I do, she said, her voice low, steady. He killed my mother. He tried to kill me. I'm not running anymore. She stood, tucking the gun into her belt, and turned toward the mouth of the canyon. The sky above was bleeding orange into purple, shadows crawling down the stone walls like smoke. For a moment she hesitated, glancing back at the man who had become something like family. I'll come back, she whispered. I promise. Silas wanted to stop her, to reach out, to say anything that might break through the fire in her eyes. But pain stole his strength, and all he could do was watch her disappear into the fading light. By the time the ranch hands found him, hours later, the sun had dipped below the ridge. They carried him back, bandaged the wound, and called for the doctor. When Martha asked where the girl was, Silas's answer came out hoarse and broken. She's gone. Gone where? He looked toward the canyon, his voice a whisper. To finish what I couldn't. Meanwhile, the girl's footsteps echoed along the canyon trail. The air grew colder with each step, the silence pressing against her like a living thing. She followed the faint smell of smoke, the same scent that had haunted her dreams, until it led her to a narrow pass. The moon had risen by then, throwing silver light across the rocks. As she climbed higher, she felt it, the weight of every memory that wasn't hers but still belonged to her. She saw flashes of Clara's hands guiding hers as a child, teaching her to tie a bandana, to braid her hair, to be brave when fear clawed at her chest. She heard her mother's voice whispering, "Don't let him find you." And now she understood who him was, Jacob Ward, her mother's brother, her uncle, the man who had betrayed them all. Her grip tightened on the revolver. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying the faint creak of leather, saddle straps shifting, hooves scuffing against stone. She stopped, her pulse racing. Someone was close. She ducked behind a boulder, holding her breath. Through the gap she saw him, a tall figure cloaked in shadow, a rifle slung over one shoulder. The same serpent and spur emblem glinted faintly on his belt buckle. Jacob Ward. He moved with the calm of a man who'd been waiting. His head turned slightly, and though she couldn't see his eyes, she felt them find her. "You can come out now," his voice called, low and amused. "Ain't no use hiding, I already know who you are." Her stomach twisted. She rose slowly from behind the rock, revolver shaking in her hand. He studied her with a kind of sick fascination. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, a smile tugging at his mouth. "You've got her face. Clara's little girl." "Don't say her name," she snapped. "Why not? She was family." His tone turned sharp. "But she chose the wrong side, just like your uncle." Her finger brushed the trigger. "You killed her," he shrugged. "She made her choice. I warned her what would happen if she ran. She took something that belonged to me, and she paid the price." Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't blink. "You don't own people," she said. Jacob tilted his head, smiling darkly. "You've got more of me in you than you think, little dove." The nickname twisted in her gut. The world blurred for a heartbeat, her vision flashing between past and present. The flames, the screams, her mother's hands pushing her through a door before the fire consumed everything. She raised the gun higher. "You took everything from me." He stepped closer, unhurried. "Then go ahead, take it back." Her breath trembled, her hand tightening. She could hear her heartbeat pounding louder than the wind. For a second she almost fired, almost ended it right there, but a whisper echoed in her mind, her mother's voice soft and clear. "Don't let hate make you like him." She hesitated just long enough for Jacob's expression to change, from smug to deadly. "Too slow," he growled. He reached for his revolver. A shot cracked through the canyon, but not from her gun. The echo rolled through the cliffs like thunder. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest, expecting pain. But there was none. The bullet had hit the rock beside her. Jacob laughed softly, lowering his gun again. "I just wanted to see if you'd flinch." Her jaw set, anger cutting through her fear. "You'll regret not pulling that trigger." She turned sharply and ran deeper into the canyon, the shadows swallowing her whole. Behind her, Jacob's laughter followed, low and hollow, chasing her into the dark. She reached the mouth of a narrow cave, heart hammering, and froze. The faint glow of a fire flickered inside, and Jacob's voice drifted out of the darkness, calm and waiting. "Told you, little dove, you can't outrun family." The moon hung over the canyon like a blade of silver, sharp enough to cut through the darkness. It bathed the stone walls in ghostly light, turning the ground into a pale, glowing floor of dust and memory. And there, under that cruel light, two figures faced each other. One a broken man carved from years of sin, the other a girl trembling between fear and fury. Two generations of pain finally staring each other down. Jacob Ward stood near the dying campfire, the flames painting his face in restless shadows. He looked calm, too calm for a man cornered by the blood of his own kin. His revolver hung loose at his side, but his eyes burned bright, cunning, calculating. Across from him, the girl gripped Silas's revolver with both hands, her knuckles white, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. The night was still, save for the low hum of wind whispering through the canyon's hollow lungs. "Go on," Jacob said, voice smooth as whiskey and twice as dangerous. "If you're gonna shoot me, do it now. The moon's watching. Might as well make it quick." Her finger hovered over the trigger, but her breath came fast and uneven. "Why?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Why did you kill her?" "My mother never hurt anyone." Jacob tilted his head, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Is that what you think, little dove? That she was innocent?" "Don't call me that," he laughed softly. "Your mother said the same thing once." The sound cut through her like a knife. "Tell me the truth," she said, stepping closer. "All of it." Jacob's gaze flickered to the fire. The crackle filled the silence between them as he spoke, each word slow, deliberate. "Your mother wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting what was mine. There's land out there, rich land, oil under the soil. I found it first, signed the papers, but she stole them. Said she'd hide them until I turned myself in for what happened that night. She thought she could buy redemption with my damn signature." The girl's voice shook. "You killed her over money?" He smiled, cold and thin. "I killed her because she took my future. She made me a ghost before I ever died. That child she ran with, you, was supposed to die with her. Yet here you are, standing in front of me, looking like her reflection, reminding me of every wrong turn I ever took." The words struck her harder than the wind. For a moment the world blurred, her mother's face flashing through the smoke, her voice echoing in her mind, "Run, Lila, run." The memory wasn't distant now, it was real, immediate. She saw the flames again, the silhouette of a man standing behind them, the glint of a revolver. "You set the fire," she whispered. Jacob's eyes narrowed, that ghost of guilt flickering behind them. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. She wouldn't hand over the deed. Things got out of hand. You murdered her!" The words ripped out of her like thunder, and before she could stop herself, she pulled the trigger. The shot split the night, the sound ricocheting off the canyon walls. Jacob staggered, not from the bullet, it had missed, but from the shock that she'd actually fired. A puff of dust rose inches from his boot. He stared at her, then began to laugh. "You've got fire, girl," he said, drawing his gun. "Your mama would be proud." The next seconds were chaos. Gunfire roared through the canyon, the sound echoing in endless waves. Dust exploded from the ground as bullets tore through it. The girl ducked behind a rock, the revolver shaking in her hands. Jacob fired again, the blast lighting his face like a devil's grin. Then, from the far end of the canyon, another sound, one she'd almost given up on hearing. A weak, familiar voice calling her name. "Lila!" Her heart jolted. She turned and saw him, Silas Ward, stumbling down the rocky path, blood darkening his shirt, one hand gripping the wall for balance, the other clutching his rifle. "Leave her alone, Jacob," he shouted, his voice hoarse but unyielding. Jacob's smirk faltered. "You never did know when to stay dead, brother." Silas raised his rifle, the barrel trembling from weakness but steady enough to mean it. You always said the past would catch up with you, he said through gritted teeth. Looks like you were right. Jacob stepped back, eyes darting between them. This ain't your fight anymore, Silas. Silas coughed, a harsh, wet sound. It's always been my fight. You took Clara from me once. You won't take her child. The girl rose from cover, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. He's not worth it, she said, voice trembling. Let's go. Please. But Silas didn't move. He kept his rifle trained on Jacob, every line in his face carved from years of guilt and grief. You wanted your reckoning, brother, he said quietly. Here it is. Jacob sneered, stepping closer. You think you can still outshoot me? You're half dead already. Silas's hand tightened on the trigger. Maybe, but I only need one good shot. The silence that followed stretched thin, humming with tension. Even the wind seemed to hold still. The fire crackled once, a spark rising into the night, and then both men moved at once. 2 gunshots, 1 scream. Dust filled the air as the echo bounced between the cliffs. The girl ducked, heart pounding, and when she looked up, she saw Silas crumpled to his knees, his rifle falling from his grasp. Silas! She cried, running toward him, but Jacob moved faster. He kicked the gun away and grabbed her by the wrist, yanking her close. Don't make me do this, he hissed, his voice shaking now. You're all that's left of her, you understand. That makes you mine. She fought against his grip, twisting, nails scraping his arm. I'll never be yours. Jacob's face twisted in rage, years of guilt and greed and madness bleeding together. He raised his revolver, pressing the barrel against her chest. Then you'll be nobody's. Before he could fire, a low groan came from behind him. Silas, half conscious, had managed to lift his rifle once more. Jacob, he rasped. The outlaw turned, his eyes wide. A single shot cracked through the night, louder than all the rest. For an instant, everything went still. The moonlight caught the drifting dust, turning the air into silver fog. The girl froze, the world narrowing to the glint of the revolver falling from Jacob's hand, the echo of the gunshot fading into silence. Then, darkness. The smoke cleared and the girl's trembling hand reached out toward the fallen men. But before she could move, a shadow behind her cocked a revolver and the screen cut to black. The next sound wasn't a gun. It was the echo of a promise kept. The moonlight flickered against the canyon walls as the gunshot's roar faded into silence. For a moment, everything stood still. The wind stopped. The dust hung midair. Then came the groan, low, labored, human. The girl turned slowly, heart hammering in her chest, to see Silas Ward still standing, or trying to. His rifle smoked faintly, one last trail of fire curling from the barrel. Jacob Ward staggered back, confusion flickering across his face. He looked down at the spreading red stain blooming through his shirt, as if the sight of his own blood was more surprise than pain. The revolver slipped from his grasp, clattering against the rock. You always were too stubborn, Jacob gasped. His legs gave out and he fell to his knees, the sound of him hitting the dirt echoing through the canyon like thunder. Silas dropped the rifle and stumbled forward, half crawling across the rough ground until he reached his brother's side. His breathing was ragged, each inhale wet and broken. He caught Jacob before he fell fully, lowering him gently to the earth. Didn't want it to end like this, Silas muttered, voice hoarse. Jacob's eyes met his, dimming but clear. You didn't leave me much choice. You could have come home. Home? Jacob coughed, blood streaking his chin. Home burned with her. Silas flinched at that. Clara's name didn't have to be said. It hovered between them, heavier than all the years that had passed. The girl stood a few feet away, frozen in place, her small hands trembling around the revolver she'd dropped. She couldn't look away from the 2 brothers. One dying, one barely holding on, both swallowed by the same sorrow. Jacob's voice came weaker now. You tell her. He swallowed, fighting for breath. Tell her she's the last of us, the only thing worth saving. Silas's grip tightened on his brother's coat. You could have told her yourself. A faint smile ghosted across Jacob's face. Never was good at saying sorry. Then his body went still. The last breath left him in a quiet exhale that drifted up into the cold night air, vanishing like smoke. Silas stayed there for a long while, head bowed, his blood mixing with his brother's in the dirt. The girl finally moved, kneeling beside them. "Is he gone?" Silas nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's done." She looked down at Jacob's face. No cruelty now, no fury, just a man worn out by his own choices. "He said I'm the last," she whispered. Silas turned to her, his voice gentler than it had ever been. "You're not the last, Lila. Not while I'm still breathing." He reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he'd touched her with tenderness instead of caution. The first time she didn't flinch. They buried Jacob at sunrise on a ledge overlooking the canyon. The morning light fell soft across the stones, the wind carrying the scent of sage and smoke. Silas said nothing during the burial, no words, no prayers. When he finished, he took off his hat, placed it over his heart, and whispered something too quiet for the girl to hear. Back at the ranch, silence hung heavy in the air. But it wasn't the same silence that had haunted those walls before. This one felt different, peaceful, earned. The weight of the past had settled, finally ready to rest. Over the next few days, Silas healed slow but steady. Martha fussed over him like a mother hen, while the girl threw herself into the rhythm of work again. Only this time, the work wasn't about proving herself. It was about belonging. She cleaned, cooked, fed the horses, and tended to the garden behind the barn, humming the same melody her mother once did. One evening, as the sun melted behind the horizon, she called Silas to supper. The smell of roast meat and fresh bread filled the kitchen. He sat down slowly, eyeing the plate in front of him. "You cooked this?" he asked, skeptical but amused. She nodded proudly. "Did it right this time. Martha said I didn't burn a thing." He took a bite. For the first time in years, he smiled, a real quiet smile that reached his tired eyes. Clara would have liked this. The girl's eyes softened. "You really think so?" "I know so." They ate together in the warm glow of lantern light. For once, there were no ghosts between them, only the quiet comfort of shared blood, shared pain, and something that might have been hope. When supper was done, the girl gathered the dishes, humming under her breath. Silas leaned back in his chair, the exhaustion of years finally starting to ease. Outside, the night spread calm across the plains. The stars came out one by one, bright and sharp against the dark sky. For the first time since Clara's death, the ranch felt alive again. The fences stood mended, the fields stretched golden under the moonlight, and laughter, soft and unguarded, found its way back into the house. But peace on the frontier never lasted long. As Silas poured himself a final cup of coffee, a sharp knock echoed through the door. He frowned, exchanging a glance with the girl. It was well past dark, too late for visitors. "Stay put," he murmured, rising carefully from his chair. He crossed the room and pulled open the door. No one stood on the porch, but a single envelope lay on the wooden boards, its edges damp with dew. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. The wax seal was cracked but unmistakable, a serpent coiled around a spur, the same mark Jacob had worn on his ring. Silas's breath caught. He turned the envelope over, his thumb brushing the faint writing scrawled across it. There was no name, no return, just 3 words written in rough ink. "It isn't over." Behind him, the girl's voice came softly from the table. "What is it?" He looked back at her, the weight of the moment pressing hard against his chest. He forced a small, steady smile. "Just a letter from town," he lied, tucking it into his coat. "Nothing you need to worry about tonight." But as he glanced once more at the serpent insignia, the flicker of dread returned to his eyes. The past had a way of sending warnings before it came knocking again. He blew out the lantern, the room fading into shadow. The girl yawned, stretching, ready for sleep. Silas lingered by the window, watching the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills, trouble was stirring again. He could feel it in his bones. The night held its breath, waiting. In the pale moonlight, the unopened letter sat on the mantel, and beneath the serpent insignia a faint line of fresh ink appeared, as if written by an unseen hand. He wasn't the last. The morning sun broke over the plains like a blessing, spilling gold across the valley and catching the edges of the letter that still sat unopened on Silas Ward's table. For 2 days it had lingered there, an unspoken question in the quiet house. But now, with the fire crackling low and the girl setting breakfast on the stove, Silas knew it was time. He reached for the envelope, his fingers rough against the paper, and broke the wax seal. The sound was small, but it felt like thunder. Inside was a folded document, old but official, the ink faded around the edges. At the top, a single line caught his eye. Deed of ownership, Ward Estate Holdings. His brow furrowed as he scanned the next page. The land described stretched far beyond his ranch, acres upon acres of untouched property reaching to the foot of the northern hills, worth more than the entire county. Beneath the legal text, a handwritten note rested in delicate cursive, its words trembling like a whisper from the past. For whoever carries Clara's name and kindness, this land is yours. Let the Ward bloodline heal where it once burned. Silas's hand stilled. He looked up slowly, his gaze falling on the girl. She stood by the window, sunlight painting her hair in shades of gold. She wasn't watching him. She was looking out at the horizon where the wind moved through the grass like waves on a sea of green. This was hers, he said quietly. Your mother's. She left it for you. The girl turned, her eyes wide, uncertain. For me? He nodded. For both of us, maybe. For what's left of this family. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she crossed the room, the floorboards creaking under her bare feet, and stared down at the papers. She wanted us to start over, she said softly. Rebuild, Silas added. Not just the land, but everything we lost. The words hung between them, fragile but real. In that silence, something settled. Acceptance, maybe even peace. The weeks that followed changed the ranch in ways neither of them had expected. The repairs that had long been postponed were finally done. The fences mended, the barn roof patched, the old windmill brought back to life. Silas oversaw it all. Slower now, the scar at his side still aching when he moved too fast. But he worked with a purpose he hadn't felt in decades. And the girl, Lila, was everywhere. She learned to ride better than most men twice her age, her laughter echoing across the fields as she broke in the wild chestnut mare that no one else could touch. She tended to the horses with a gentle hand and learned to balance ledgers by lamplight when the days turned long. The ranch began to breathe again. Neighbors who had once kept their distance started visiting more often, curious about the quiet girl who'd somehow brought life back to the old Ward place. Martha, ever the sentinel of the household, took to calling Lila Miss Clara when she thought no one was listening. Silas pretended not to hear, but every time she said it, he caught a glimmer of warmth in his chest. As the seasons turned, the land thrived. The drought that had once threatened the valley broke, and the rains returned, filling the streams that ran through the lowlands. The grass grew thick, the cattle fat, and the fences strong. But more than the ranch, it was the people who mended. Silas had carried guilt like a second shadow for most of his life. Guilt for the fire, for the brother he lost twice, for the sister he failed to protect. Yet watching Lila move through those fields, seeing her live without fear, that weight began to lift. She'd brought back the one thing time couldn't steal: faith. One evening as the sun bled across the sky, he found her sitting on the porch rail, staring out toward the hills. The same hills that had once burned under his brother's rage now glowed soft under the amber light. "Place looks different when you ain't running from ghosts," he said, easing into the chair beside her. She smiled faintly. "Guess ghosts don't stay where there's work to do." He chuckled. "Smart girl." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crickets sing and the wind hum through the grass. Somewhere out there, Jacob's grave still marked the canyon floor, but neither spoke his name. Some stories were better left whispered to the wind. After supper that night, Lila cooked again, a simple meal, but perfect this time. No burnt edges, no forgotten salt. Just warmth, care, and quiet pride. She placed the dish before Silas and said with a teasing grin, "Told you I'd get it right someday." He tasted it, chewed, and nodded. "Tastes like home." The words surprised them both, but neither tried to take them back. As the lanterns dimmed, Lila cleaned the dishes while Silas sat near the hearth, running his thumb along the edge of the old locket now hanging from her neck. It gleamed faintly in the firelight, its photo long replaced by a sketch of the three of them, Clara, Silas, and the girl who carried both their spirits. Outside, the plains stretched endless and calm. Coyotes howled somewhere far off, not in warning, but in song. The air was heavy with the scent of rain again, the promise of another season ready to bloom. And yet, beneath that peace something stirred, a whisper from the past that refused to die. Later that night, when the stars burned cold and bright, Lila stepped outside one last time. She looked toward the mountains, those dark blue shapes against the horizon where the fire had once raged, and her mother had vanished. The wind tugged at her hair, warm and wild. "I'll find the rest of our story," she whispered, her voice steady. "Whatever it takes." She turned back toward the ranch house where Silas waited by the door, lantern in hand. "Time for bed," he said softly. She smiled. "Tomorrow, then." And as she walked inside, the light from the lantern flickered across the photograph above the mantel, the one of Clara, young and laughing, holding a newborn child. Beneath it, the deed lay safe in a wooden box sealed with the same insignia that had once stood for blood and betrayal. Now it meant something else entirely. Legacy. The wind rose one last time, carrying Clara's name across the fields, blending with the hum of crickets and the low rustle of horses in the stables. The ward land slept under the stars, alive again, reborn from its ashes. But far beyond the ranch, beyond the valley and the hills, a lone rider crossed the horizon. His coat was dark, his face hidden beneath a wide hat, and on his hand, the moonlight caught the glint of a familiar serpent-shaped ring. The rider paused at the ridge, looking down toward the glowing ranch lights. From that distance, he smiled, voice carried softly by the wind. "The story ain't over yet, little dove. And if this story touched your heart, don't ride off just yet. There are more untold tales waiting beyond the next horizon. Hit subscribe and ring that bell icon so you never miss the next Western that rides through our channel. Share this story with someone who still believes in family, forgiveness, and second chances. Your one click keeps these stories alive, and together we'll keep the spirit of the Old West burning bright."